I'm Bob Wernle. This is August 26, 1999. We're doing an interview today, part of our series of interviews of what people in Montgomery County were doing back at the time of World War II. We started this project some 7 or 8 years ago, and we've done I don't know how many interviews now, but to try to get a picture, a collage of what went on here at home what went on to the people who were living here now during the war. We're interviewing here at Lane Place Joe Rourke. As I said, I'm Bob Wernle. I'm on the Oral History Committee of the Montgomery County Historical Society, and I, along with Claire Chamberlain and Marion Kirtley, have done most of these interviews. The cameraman today is Mike Hall, who is the executive director of the Montgomery County Historical Society. I will start out here by asking our interviewee to give his complete name.
Well, I'm Joseph O'Rourke Jr., and I'm a retired professor from Wabash College. Taught there for 37 years.
And when were you born?
May 11th, 1928.
And where were you born?
Well, I was born in Davenport, Iowa, but I grew up in St. Louis. And my father worked on the river. He was a marine engineer. And so we always had to stay close to a river. And that's why I was born in Davenport, and then he eventually joined the Corps of Engineers, and his main responsibility was dredging the Mississippi.
And where did your folks come from originally?
Originally they came from Louisiana. My father from New Orleans. And
it sounds like an Irish name.
Yeah, it is. And
they're all French down there.
No. New Orleans has got a great heritage of Irish contributions. The ones who dug the canals were all Irish, and many of them died. And New Orleans was a great jumping off place for the West. And so many were attracted.
Went around through Nicaragua?
No, well, as a matter of fact, during the siege of the Alamo, a group of Irish patriots joined Santa Anna because they thought here was a nice Catholic people, and they were Catholic, and of course these other people were really invaders trying to colonize the land, and so they had some feelings about that. And so to this day in Mexico City there's a monument honoring the Irish Brigade that helped Santa Anna.
I never knew that.
Oh yes, it's been documented. I have a friend in England who's working on that as his historical study project.
Joe, about yourself, where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in St. Louis, Southwest High School. It was, at that time, in a suburb of St. Louis, or the southwest part of St. Louis, which was close to a suburb. And I went there for 4 years, graduated in 1946. The day after graduation, I enlisted in the Army. And within a couple of days, I was on my way to Fort Bliss, Texas, which is not one of the vacation spots of the world. Hot place. And did basic training down there. And then
was that Fort Bliss was artillery, or what was it?
Fort Bliss was artillery, and we were trained in anti-aircraft One of my memories of basic training is that on gunnery days, the instructors were so concerned because some of our privates would start tracking the plane instead of the trailer that was going along behind it. And there was a good possibility they could have brought one of them down. So we survived Fort Bliss, and I came home for a short leave and then was on my way to Japan.
Okay, how'd you get out to the West Coast?
Well, we got ourselves out to the West Coast. We took a train, and no, wait a minute. No, we were under orders there. We took a train and reported. Yeah, we reported to Camp Stoneman after our leave.
I left from Camp Stoneman myself.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, you know the routine.
You took a ferry boat down to the port.
That's right. As a matter of fact, later, after this, but after I got out of college, I took a commission and was called back into the service and ended up back at Camp Stoneman.
Oh.
And just as I was about to go overseas to the Korean War, they signed the truce. I don't think it had anything to do with me coming, but they signed the truce. And I was immediately released, but I had 3 weeks to stay over, and I ended up commander of that ferry boat that went down to the docks every day with a boatload of troops. And so they put me on that duty until I was discharged and went back to college. But anyway.
What kind of ship did you go over on?
I went over on a ship, a converted tanker. And I suspect that's one reason why it rolled so much. It was a Marine, I believe it was a Marine pilot. No, that wasn't. I'm stretching for the name. But anyway, it rolled a good deal. And some joker in of the non-coms put on Ravel's da 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 da, you know, that one, Bolero. And it has that awful
Ravel Bolero.
Yeah,
heard it last night.
Well, it had that awful rolling effect,
Yeah.
and it made more guys seasick over the inside of the rail. And so he played that all the way over. It took us 16 days to get over it. And we came into Yokohama, and that was all of us, our first experience with Japan.
Well, now, of course, the war. How long before you left had the war been over?
The war had been over a year.
Uh-huh.
So this was 1946, October. And as we came into the harbor, we passed Mount Fujiyama, and there it was, just like all the postcards. And then we came into Tokyo Bay, or not what was Tokyo Bay, but we docked at Yokohama. It's only 11 miles away. And there we were greeted with the sight of the bow of this aircraft carrier sticking out of the water. And of course, in the last days of the war, our submarines got in under the nets and played havoc with Japanese shipping in there.
Oh.
And so I got the story later from a friend of mine that this aircraft carrier had just been launched. And they were having a great celebration. And it was out there floating. And our submarine put a couple of torpedoes in it and it went down before it ever went to sea.
Right to Tokyo Bay.
Yeah, right there.
How long before you got there did that happen?
That had happened before the end of the war.
Yeah.
But they had no way of getting it up, and so they just left it there.
Oh, but still.
I think they finally removed it. Well, anyway, we docked at Yokohama, and that was another one of those repo depots, as you recall, where they throw you in and you're cast by lot into what unit you're going to join. Well, our group was cast for GHQ. We didn't know what the devil that was all about, but General Headquarters. And they put us in trucks to go down to Tokyo, which is not that far away, but it was a coldest ride I can ever remember. And there we were stacked in these trucks like cords of wood, sitting around trying to keep warm. And we got to Tokyo, and they took us to what was known as the finance building. And that was GHQ headquarters. It was I think it was a
what shape was the Tokyo in? Did you notice the devastation?
Oh yes, oh yes. There wasn't much left really of the housing. Buildings had been selectively bombed. The War Ministry, for instance, was just gutted. And that was about 3 blocks from the Daiichi building that wasn't touched.
Now, what was the Daiichi building?
The Daiichi building was MacArthur's headquarters, and he picked that. And the Imperial Hotel, where I eventually was stationed, wasn't touched. And so, what impressed us all was the kind of pinpoint bombing that had taken out key installations. Factories were gutted. And the houses, being mostly paper and bamboo, incendiaries just took out whole blocks of them. So you would look out over the city and you'd see whole blocks that had just gone. And rapidly trying to rebuild, but rebuilding with the same kind of paper and bamboo. So there was an awful lot of devastation. Bomb craters were still about. We were the replacements for troops that had just come in at the end of the war and were waiting for their points to be enough to get out. You remember the old point system?
Oh, I know. Well aware of that.
People had to count and count, and so I came into GHQ and was interviewed by a guy who said, "You may be my replacement." I said, "Well, that's all right." And so I went through a rather cursory interview and, to find out what we could do. And GHQ was assigned to, the enlisted men were assigned to...
That merely means general headquarters.
General headquarters.
Yeah.
Were assigned to desk duty all over Tokyo. And hotel clerks, billet clerks, and in my case, they found out I had worked as a stock boy in a grocery, so they put me in the post exchange, which was a pretty big operation. And so I went to the post exchange company, and this included guys who ran the warehouses in Tokyo, ones that ran other PXs in Tokyo. The main PX was like a big department store at that time. In fact, they took over one of the main department stores for it. And they took over some of the recreational facilities and the beer halls. And it was really quite an operation. And the leading civilian in this operation was a fellow named Stankus from the University of Illinois who had just been discharged as a captain. And then we had 3 other captains in the platoon. One was an accountant, the other was a field man, but he was a career officer. And then we had about 65, 70 enlisted men. My first job was to assign the PX cards to make them valid. And so I would sign my captain's name and initial it. And so...
Now, the PX cards were issued to service personnel and their spouses.
That's right.
Families. And
That was
anybody else?
No, they weren't supposed to be. In fact, I was the one that was supposed to screen them. And indeed, we provided PX cards for the spouses and the husbands, not the kids. And my job was to keep a record of who got them. And sure enough, 1 or 2 tried to get double cards. Because rationing was strict, cigarettes in particular. Because cigarettes were not only for the consumption of the troops, and practically everybody smoked, but also they were a good black market commodity. So
did you smoke at the time?
No, I did not. But
I know, Joe, that was the same way with me. I didn't smoke, but I got a cigarette ration, and that was a wonderful coin.
Yes, indeed. Well, it was about what, I think, paid 75 cents for a carton of cigarettes. And everybody was entitled to a carton a week.
Yeah, so you could use those.
Yeah. But the other things that they had restricted were shaving cream for a while. That was tough to get. And some candy. And then there were some other things that, such as cameras. Almost anything that could convert to money on the black market was rationed. And people had a little card that they were allowed to punch for so many purchases. One of my experiences when I was in the PX was General Wainwright of the 8th Army came to the Imperial Hotel, and he saw a camera on my shelves that he liked. And he says, well, I think I'll take that. And I said, sir, may I have your PX card? And he looked at me as if I were an alien from another country. And he said, well, no, I didn't say I don't have a PX card, but I would like to buy that camera. I'm sorry, sir. It's restricted. Well, he said, well, that's all right. Thank you very much, Sergeant. He starts stomping off. And pretty soon, here comes the manager of the hotel. He was an American civilian, had a great hotel career. And he came to me and said, what did you just do? I said, well, I told General Wainwright we had to have a PX card. And he said, no, don't you know there are some people that have we're a little less concerned about them siphoning it off on the black market, so he would have been perfectly all right. I said, well, sir, I'm instructed clearly here, no member of the armed services may have this material without their kit. And I made my point legally, but at the same time, I was always under a cloud with him as being overly protective of our merchandise. But anyway, that's about it. Well, to get back to it, my first job, as I said, was signing these cards for men who had just come over and their dependents. And we were getting a pretty good flow of dependents, families coming over. So if an officer's wife came in, he would immediately be assigned quarters, usually in Quonset huts out in Tokyo that would provide the housing, dependent housing. And I don't know if you remember Phil Spelt at all.
Phil Spelt?
Yeah, who used to be at the college. His wife was born in Tokyo and grew up in those Quonset huts. Their father was a member of the staff there. But anyway, these people would be assigned billets, and they would get their PX cards and their commissary cards, which is also part of ours, and then become part of the occupation family, and so on. And so the Tokyo started to take on, particularly in some of the better billets and on the street, an Americanized look. You could always pick it out because there were a lot of civilians who were working in MacArthur's headquarters, and of course the enlisted men and their families. And pretty soon Jeeps were being converted with sides put on them. Japanese would build aluminum sides on the Jeeps and make them sort of coupes. Well, and then later they started bringing in automobiles from the States. The first one.
Joe, here you were coming into a bunch of Americans coming into the Japanese, all this environment. How did you find, or what was the attitude of the Japanese people by this time?
That was interesting. Very, very much aware that the Americans were in charge. Some resentment, but not stated openly. People that worked for you were to the point of being obsequious, anything to please. And I had 3 Japanese employees working for me in the PX, and they knew they had been beaten. They knew it was. Many of them told us they knew it was a mistake. And our drivers, we had some Jeep drivers around the hotel who were a particularly crusty lot, told me that our army was more screwed up than your army. Otherwise, we would have won. And we usually, they were by this time speaking a kind of pidgin English, and we were exchanging comparisons.
Yeah, that's interesting. How did you get along with this language problem?
Well, now every Japanese had some English, it seemed, or at least all the ones we came into contact with, and they wanted you to talk to them so they could study their English. Well, and so everybody we hired had a pretty good understanding of English.
Did you get exposed to Japanese yourself?
Well, now I went to a class, and I tried it for about 3 weeks, and I picked up my brand of pidgin English so that I could get by shopping on the Ginza or elsewhere. But after 3 weeks, I got another assignment, and I couldn't go to school anymore. And so about what I came out with was sayonara, damio, and 1 or 2 phrases that I could use at a proper time. One of the interesting things is that many of the GIs were picking up like these Japanese phrases, would build them into the rhythm of English. Japanese is a language that is not very fluid language. It's got a staccato quality to it. And I remember one guy in our build one time, his laundry had been delivered. And so he's standing in the doorway shouting down the hall at Papa-san, who was the houseboy for our barracks. Papa-san, no goddamn nay. Get the hell and Hayaku down here. I often marveled at that, how you could blend some of the profanity into these phrases and get your meaning across. Well, anyway, I spent about 2 months in the office there signing these cards, and then the fellow that was at the Imperial Hotel was being rotated, and they asked me if I'd like to manage the Imperial Hotel post-exchange. And it was an interesting assignment because we were moved into the hotel.
How big a hotel was that?
Well, the Imperial was the gem of the Orient at that time. It had been designed by Frank Lloyd Wright with a particular kind of construction so that the brick would withstand earthquakes. And you could actually walk in there and move bricks around from place to place. And it was that quality in those bricks that allowed the thing to ride out these earthquakes. And we had a few.
That's, I suppose you probably saw that program maybe just this morning about construction for earthquakes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, he was so far ahead of his time on that.
Turkish earthquake, they were talking about how San Francisco was built for that and Tokyo is.
Yeah. Well, this building was. Not all of Tokyo was, but this building was, and I think they incorporated some of the earthquake-proof designs that Wright brought there.
Yeah.
Because they did have some extraordinarily good buildings. The Daiichi building, where MacArthur's headquarters was immaculate. And it was right across the street from the Imperial Palace. And MacArthur's headquarters office was above the Emperor's home.
Oh, you keep talking about MacArthur. When did MacArthur show up?
Well, MacArthur was there when I got there, and so I'm not sure he requested me. But the interesting thing about the Imperial Hotel assignment was that I got a chance to meet practically every VIP in Tokyo because they all stayed at the Imperial. And let me just do a little name dropping, but this included all the judges of the war crimes trial. And the war crimes were going on then. And I made particular friends with Major General Kramer and his wife. He was a 2-star general in the Judge Advocate's Corps, and he was representing the United States. Also got to meet the Russian judge, who was a blustery kind of non-English speaking soul who had with him always a guy that looked very much like...
like a thug?
Well, no, he looked slick, and he always smoked his cigarette. like that. And he would translate for the general. And I'm not sure the general always got a fair translation, because he was a big, robust guy, and I understand that he had once been a baker in Russia. He got his law degree and then went on. But he was their representative. And then New Zealand and Australia's justices, Norcroft and I forget the other one's name. But they were very fine people, and they'd come down in the lobby every evening where my PX was, and they'd chat. And I would overhear a lot of these chats. I was a magnificent eavesdropper. But I got to hear some of these stories about witnesses who would tell their stories at the war crimes trial. And I don't suppose judges were supposed to talk about this outside.
No, not.
But they did, and I got some stories of guys who'd been in prison since Bataan, and so on. So, in that time...
Did you see, who were some of the principals in these war crimes trials? Who was being tried?
Well, this would be Tojo was being tried.
Tojo?
And several of his staff. That was interesting. The emperor was not put on trial.
That was
MacArthur did that deliberately.
Yeah.
And nor the royal family, although there were several there that had been involved. And so it was mostly military staff that were being tried at that time, and cabinet ministers. And so they...
Did they have any of the little guys, or was it all...
No, this was... by the time when I got there, they just started the war crimes trial. And in fact, they were still in early preparation. It had only been a year, and they were gathering evidence. Which brings up a sidelight that, in addition to the war crimes justices at the hotel, they had confiscated many of the homes, the better homes on the outskirts of Tokyo, to be used as billets for the witnesses. And so my friend, Tim Moriarty, another good Irishman, and was made assigned to one of these. And he would tell me some tales of horror about these guys having nightmares at night and prowling through the house as if they're trying to escape. And so his job was largely to keep the peace out there at the Prince Shimoda.
These witnesses, you mean the people who had been abused?
Yes. In the prison camps. And that was a major portion of testimony about people who had seen the atrocities. But they were a wild bunch. I mean, they'd been in captivity for almost 4 years, some as many as 4 years. And they were put into this wonderful billet and treated like royalty. I mean, they had a Japanese staff plus the GI staff. And so Tim's job was to keep track of them. And so he would sometimes have to go into Tokyo and find them having a rickshaw race on the Ginza. With two of them pulling the Japanese driver. He told me about that one night. And there was a good deal of drinking and a good deal of... many of them were in desperate ways, emotionally and physically, and so on. And would frequently be abusive to the staff.
They would be?
Oh, yeah. They hadn't forgotten their jailers. And so, but that was just a sidelight. But it points up how that occupation was rolling. And we had in our hotel the General Marquis, who was in charge of the economic development program, and he was a dynamo of a guy. Ideas popping out all over about how he was going to convert such and such factories and such. And indeed, he was one of the architects of the recovery program of Japan.
What was his name?
Marquis.
And like the marquee on a theater?
Yeah. And he was, I remember him, he had a little mustache and a jaunty look, and he'd come bouncing into the PX and say, "Give me my carton for the week." And I'd give him his carton for the week. But the other thing that impressed me about the Imperial and my eavesdropping is that there were also many visitors that came as very important people. And they even had a section devoted to the VIP section, devoted to escorting them and making sure that everything was taken care of. One of the ones that I remember most vividly was Father Flanagan from Boys Town.
Boys Town.
Yeah. He arrived in Tokyo.
What was he doing there?
He had come over to solve some of the problems. And you wouldn't believe this, but the streets on the Ginza had banners with Spencer Tracy on the banners. And welcome Father Flanagan.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes the L was left out, but it nevertheless.
What problems was he going to solve?
Orphans.
Oh.
He had come over there. I don't think the church sent him. I think the State Department sent him. But he was the kind of individual that once you meet him, you'd never forget him. He didn't remind me of the humble priest.
Uh-huh.
He reminded me more of a Boss Daly type committeeman. He smoked a big cigar.
Uh-huh.
Big, rough fellow. Had a handshake that would almost crush yours.
Uh-huh.
And instead of interviewing the various people that he wanted to interview, you know, the heads of orphanages and so on, in his room, he did it right out in the lobby.
Oh.
Made sure that there was press available. And he would go from group to group. Look at this poor woman. She has a group of 50 young people over there and has no support whatsoever. What are they going to do for her? And he says,
Now she's a Japanese?
Japanese woman.
Oh.
And then he'd finish with her and he'd say, I'm going to send you to such and such. And he'll take care of you. Well, he did that for a whole afternoon, just going from group to group. And all the time there was a Stars and Stripes reporters there taking it down, and Father Flanagan was having his pitch. But he was a much more a businessman, I felt, than the humble priest that we had portrayed in Boys Town.
It seems to me that the problem would be so tremendous. How could they possibly, they skim, they just touch the surface of it.
That's all they were doing, really.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that stands out, Bob, about much of the occupation, it was to put up an image of what we were and what we wanted the Japanese to be. Mm-hmm. And so, just an example. The Japanese are great on ritual. You've seen the movies of it and so on, and that's true. The ideas of bowing and respect and so on, and the leader is magnified in terms of samurai and things. Well, every morning, MacArthur, who lived at the American Embassy, would come into town in his limousine. But at the front, he had a Jeep with a machine gun. And at the back, he had a Jeep with a machine gun. And sometimes he had sirens.
Yeah, what?
Sirens.
Oh.
Like a fire engine.
Okay.
And this entourage would sail the mile and a half from the embassy, which is up on the hill back of the finance building, down to the Daiichi building, with the sirens blaring and everybody getting out of the way. And there in the back seat was Mac with his corncob pipe, looking out to the right and to the left, in kind of an imperial stance. Then when he arrived at the Daiichi building, the honor guard, which was a select group, would snap to attention and form a line on either side of the stairs, and he would go marching up there. Now, ostensibly, this was to protect him from any possible assassins' attacks, but I still think it was more to show here was a chief coming. And he did that every morning, and every evening he went home the same way.
Same way.
Just a word about the honor guard. these were select young men. All of them had to be 6 feet or more, and all had to be athletes of some sort. So they were a very fine-looking bunch of fellows. But you've heard the term chicken shit.
Sure.
The story was in there, how do I get out of this chicken shit outfit after they got in it? Because it was one inspection after another.
Yeah.
3 o'clock in the morning. And they were in GHQ, which was our unit.
Yeah.
And so we would share mess facilities with them, but they always had to have clean uniforms, brightly pressed, freshly shaved every minute of the day. They could not let down at all in public. And you could always tell a member of the honor guard because they always had a blue cord on their shoulder. But that was a part of the show. And
Yeah.
here was this troop that could drill beautifully, knew the manual of arms and so on, that he kept. And they all, many of them also lived at the embassy with him.
Uh-huh.
And at nights he used to show them movies. He had a new movie every night. And so they would sit in his theater at the embassy and look at movies. So, but that's what I mean when I say there was a lot of ostentatiousness about the whole
Oh,
affair.
MacArthur was very ostentatious.
Yes, and his and everything that went on in Tokyo, I think, had to say something. It had to say to the Japanese that here is what a free people can be. They can enjoy themselves and so on. And so we were given all of these hotels to billet our people. The new village, the Quonset huts to house the dependents. We had free access to the trains. All you had to have was a uniform. You could get on any train in the country, go anywhere you wanted to.
Where would you go?
Oh, you'd go up to Kyoto.
Uh-huh.
One of the ways I exercised there was I bought a bicycle.
Was there much left of the trains? But
Yes.
Okay.
They had put the rails back there, and I don't know if this was deliberate, but they had not bombed many of the railways.
uh
But I used to take, every Sunday I would take my bicycle out and ride up the road to Yokohama and go as far as I could. And, sometimes it would be 26, 27 miles in a day. But I never worried about getting back because then I'd just take my bicycle, get on the train, and come back to Tokyo and ride back to the station there. But those trips were remarkable because as I went up the coast, between Yokohama and Tokyo and beyond Yokohama, around Kamakura and Yokosuka, the naval base down there, you would find these caves that had been dug in to the hillsides that were to be the last defense.
Mm-hmm.
And you found the wreckage of planes, Zeros, and some B-17s that were still out there.
Mm-hmm.
In this. And the village, I'd go up at a place like Kamakura, and the villagers took me to this one B-17 that everybody knew about, but they just never bothered to get it out of the jungle.
They saw there were some American planes out there too.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they
Wreckage.
Yeah.
They hadn't moved it yet.
And, well, there was a lot of that they hadn't moved yet. Like the boat the ship I told you that was sunk, there were a lot of ships that were still in the bay that had been sunk.
Mm-hmm.
And around the countryside, you could drive by factories that were just gutted, with fire bombs and so on. But I went down to, when I drove down, took my bicycle down to the naval base, I did see the Great Buddha at Kamakura, which is something.
Joe, did you ever get up to Hiroshima or
No, that was off limits to us at that time.
or Nagasaki?
No, that was off limits too. In fact, almost all of the Japanese establishments were off limits to us. The restaurants, the bars, of course.
You're not allowed to go in a Japanese restaurant.
No.
What was the purpose of that?
To preserve the economy, I think, to save the foodstuffs for the Japanese. No, we would be, if we went out in the country, I'd always get a box lunch from our cook and so on. But no, at that time it was all off limits.
Yeah.
And we weren't supposed to be out after a certain time. There was a curfew. In fact, I remember one time Tim and I were in Tokyo, and it was past curfew, about 11:10. We were running like the devil to get back to the finance building. And we got near the Daiichi building, and the guard was changing at night, And so we said, take us home. And they threw us in the back of the truck. And we stayed under their boots and everything until we got through the gate. And then we piled out, because if we'd come in after curfew, it would have been restricted for a weekend or something. Yeah. But I'll never forget that, the honor guard taking us in and taking us back home.
Joe, before we get away from it, tell us about the attitude of the GIs. In my service, the attitude toward MacArthur was we hated the guy. But I know some people didn't feel that way.
That's right. Well, I think time and place make a difference here. For one thing, most of the occupation troops were kids just out of high school like me. It was a very young occupation force. And had come into the Army with the belief that MacArthur was a hero. So I really didn't get that much from these guys. Now, the veterans, the career guys and so on, regaled us with tales of Hollywood Mac and all the stuff he had done and so on. But no, I think MacArthur made an impression on us as being, as a true general and a true hero. We didn't know anything, knew very little about him except his war exploits.
Now, wasn't he removed from, he was brought home from...
Yes, but that was for Korea.
Wasn't he removed from his job there in Tokyo later on?
No,
I think one of the,
he was in Tokyo when the Korean War broke out. And I think he directed the war from Tokyo.
It could have been. Did he stay over there all that time?
Yes, yes. Of course, he spent most of his life, as I understand it, in the Far East, the Philippines. There. So that, no, he was perfectly at home in a foreign land. And of course, I met his wife frequently, who would come to our PX to buy things.
Tell us about her.
She was a lively, vivacious kind of gal, younger than he, very sprightly. And they had a young son, Arthur, who he protected and provided for. One of the stories that came back is that a GI had been recruited to teach young Arthur how to ice skate. Well, of course, they cleared the ice rink while young Arthur was out there. And young Arthur fell and broke his arm. The GI was promptly shipped out to first cav. And I don't know if it was MacArthur's order or his commander's order, but he was shipped out to first cav, which was on the outskirts of Tokyo, and they did the things soldiers did, not the things GHQ did. So that was one of the tales that came back. But Gene MacArthur was a very vivacious person and sociable. The women, the generals' wives and so on, used to meet for lunch at the Imperial. And they had a fine restaurant there. And, it hadn't lost a step from the pre-war. In fact, the whole hotel was still a fine hotel. And the Japanese manager was still there. working under the American manager. So that I got a chance to meet her and meet several others, and I got to like the wives pretty much. And they seemed to like me because we had the pick of the stock in terms of Japanese materials in our PX. That includes silk and so on. One story about this that might be kind of interesting. I bought a bathrobe from my PX, and it was a brocade, beautiful blue and silver with all kinds of Japanese figures, rickshaws and so on. And I brought that home. Well, when I was brought back into the Army, I was commissioned then, and we were sent to Camp Atterbury for some training. My wife is at a cocktail party, and lo and behold, my commanding officer's wife shows up in a suit made out of exactly this brocade in my bathrobe. And she asked my wife, she says, well, did Joe bring you back any materials from Japan? And she said, no, I didn't know him then. And he says, well, what do you think about this? My husband brought this back for me from Tokyo. Oh, I've seen that before. My husband has a bathrobe made out. Talk about a career being stymied early. I mean, if I'd have stayed in the Army, I'd have had to put a muzzle on the lady and so on. But anyway, that was another thing that happened while I was there that I found interesting is the Wedemeyer Commission. You remember that? They went over to China to investigate Chiang Kai-shek. Came back through, and they were clustered in the lobby there of the hotel with people from MacArthur's staff. And I was eavesdropping on this, and they were talking about the ruin of China. Now, this is while we were still supporting Chiang, before Mao had started the march. And these guys were going to, well, I guess, telling us what was going to be in their report. It was absolutely corrupt. There was no way of saving this administration. That the communists are going to take over, and we are going to have to deal with them as one of the biggest nations in the world, and how right they were. But I still remember that group that gathered in that lobby.
Who was on that commission?
Oh, there was Wedemeyer, of course, the general. He was there.
And W-E-D-E-M-E-Y-E-R. Wedemeyer, yeah. And these were mostly colonels and above, colonels and generals that had been sent out to inspect. And each of them had a specialty that they were looking at: civil administration, political feelings, and so on. And so they were bringing this report back, and when they did report, it was explosive, and so on. Say, you know what, something just occurred to me. Wasn't Beecher Young assigned to that war crimes?
I don't know.
Some capacity?
It could have been. I didn't know.
I think he was an attorney at that time, and you remember Beecher?
I know Beecher, yeah. But I never knew he had been involved in
I think he was, I don't know what capacity he was, maybe assigned to the staff or something.
Yeah.
Of the...
well, they had a bunch of them there.
Yeah.
He wasn't at the Imperial, though. They had a lot of other nice hotels, but Beecher wasn't at the Imperial.
Of course, you wouldn't have known him at that time.
No, I wouldn't have. But it's interesting, the people I did meet there. There's some very dramatic stories that they could tell. I don't know. I brought along my notebook. I don't know if this will be of any use or not, but P-131. That's all it's identifying. But here, I don't know if you can see that or not. Can you? This is a picture of my PX in the lobby of the hotel, and there I am right in the middle with the backs of Major Kramer and Mrs. Kramer, who were he was the judge of the war crimes trial. The man next to me I called simply Aki. He was a Japanese He had been trained as a naval architect and was still going to school. He'd never been inducted in the service, but he spoke English beautifully, and he was my assistant manager. But you see, the place was fairly small. It was just like a kiosk in a hotel today. And that was Major General Miss Kramer, and this was right after I made sergeant. So yeah, there's new stripes, and the Major General and his wife sent me a present, as did the New Zealand justices and the Australian. This, of course, was, I don't know if you can see up there or not, but that's the Ernie Pyle Theater, which was the center of entertainment. And we got some tremendous entertainment there from the
yes, you did.
And every night there was a different floor show and a different movie.
Who were some of the entertainers that came?
Oh my gosh, we saw the ping pong champion of America. He did a demonstration there. I think Martha Ray came one time and she entertained us. And there were a couple of others, not real big stars, but starlets that would come. And this building was remarkable because it was built in the style of Radio City Music Hall. And in these upper floors up here, they had library and recreation rooms. And so it was a great place, great city. Of course, right over here, I don't know if you can see that or not, is the Emperor's Bridge, right in front of the Imperial Palace. That was the interesting thing about all this, that I was right in the center of things at the Imperial Hotel. And I was a block from the Daiichi building, 3 blocks from the Finance building, 2 blocks from the Ginza, and right across the street from the Ernie Pyle. So you might call it posh duty. And of course, the Japanese who cleaned up our rooms and took care of us there weren't too up on rank. And so we always told them that stripes were more important than bars. Stars were most important, but stripes were more important than bars, and so we got some treatment for that. But we ate in a private dining room, and we had the same meals as they had in the restaurant, and it was pretty good duty.
Joe, something's gotten away from us. How did you happen to come to Wabash College?
Well, that's another story. After I got out of the Army in Korea, I declared the truce, I went back and did my doctorate at the University of Missouri.
You mean you came here after Korea?
No, I came here after Missouri. I went back from Korea. I didn't get to Korea. I got to Stoneman. That's when I was on that ferry boat for 3. But then after that, I got right into graduate school and did my master's degree. And then after my master's degree, I got an opportunity to go to Hawaii. And I taught there in Hilo for 2 years. Then came back to the University of Missouri and did my PhD. While I was there, Vic Powell was doing his PhD. At that time, we didn't have fair employment and all that. So it was simply a case of somebody recommending you and you could be hired. So Vic Brigance had died in January of 1960.
Okay. Now, people may not know who Brigance is.
William Norwood Brigance was an outstanding speech teacher at Wabash College. In fact, they say that he was more famous than the college itself, and was an extraordinary teacher and scholar. And when he died, it was a great loss to the profession. And so when Vic Powell, who was then made chairman of the speech department at Wabash, called to his advisor, Bauer Ailey, at Missouri, said, "Have you got a good man who's just coming up?" And Powell said, "Yes, we got O'Rourke, I think." I know O'Rourke because I was at school with him. And so one thing led to another, and I got the job.
What year is that?
1960.
Okay.
So that, I was in Tokyo from 46 up to the first of 48. 48, I went to the University of Missouri, got my AB. 52, I graduated. 52, I went back in the service. 53, I went into the service for...
Were you called back in the service?
No, yes, I was. As soon as I was commissioned. And we were headed for Korea.
Well, now, how'd you get your commission?
ROTC.
At Missouri?
At Missouri. And so I got in there and I got out just in time to go back into graduate school, did my master's degree, then went to Hawaii for 2 years, then went back to Missouri, got a PhD, and then got the call from Vic.
Okay.
And that gets us up to date. And 37 years later, we came with the idea of 2 years and out on the bigger and
better. Who was the president?
The president then was Tribbett, Byron Tribbett, magnificent man. And I'll never forget my first interview with Tribbett. I mean, he could have asked me to take a pay cut, and I would have. He was that kind of...
But you weren't... This was your first job then, what?
Second. I taught in Hawaii for 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
At the University of Hawaii?
Yes, they had just started a branch in Hilo.
Uh-huh.
And so I was one of the new staff. There were 10 of us that were sent over there, each of us teaching a different thing.
Uh-huh.
And so we were all department heads. And, so I taught there for 2 years, and my son was born there, Jerry. And we had a wonderful time.
Oh, you're married. When were you? Tell us about your wife.
Oh, Bev and I got married in 1952 in December. I had been at Fort Sill taking artillery training, and about the only thing I was really good at as a second lieutenant was at forward observing. And that was the least desirable job. But we got married in December in between camps from Fort Sill.
This was what year?
This would be 1952. We were married in December. In 1953, I reported, January 1st of 1953, reported to Camp Atterbury and was down there for 6 months and was I&E officer, information and education officer, for the 31st Division down there.
Uh-huh.
And then I got orders for Korea, and so we got out to the West Coast, and I was left at Camp Stoneman. She flew home, thinking it was going to be a long wait. And I had orders to get on board the ship the next morning, and then the telegraph came in that the truce had been signed.
Uh-huh.
An immediate release for all officers with more than 2 years duty.
Uh-huh.
Well, with my time in as an enlisted man and my time in as an officer, I qualified.
Yeah.
And so they hurried us through, and that's why I spent 3 weeks at Stoneman
Uh-huh.
on the ferry boat.
What was the name of that ferry boat?
I forget. I should know because I had to sign for it every day. And I said, well, what does this mean when I sign for it? If it sinks, you pay for it. And I said, I don't know if I can make that on a second lieutenant's pay.
I can still remember that ferry boat.
Wasn't that something?
Okay, let's take a pause here.
Okay.
Okay.
Joe, one of the questions we always ask these veterans is, do you ever go to reunions? You ever see any of the fellows you were with?
No, interestingly enough, Bill Swift was there. Bill Swift, who was on our faculty and a math professor.
Oh, yeah.
He was there, but he was out in the boondocks in 1st Cavalry. And we were there almost exactly at the same time, and we occasionally exchanged stories of nights in Tokyo, which were sometimes interesting and never dull.
When you were in the service there, did you meet anybody that you'd known before?
Well, Tim Moriarty and I were lucky enough to meet at induction. He enlisted the same day I did for the same reason. We'd been promised a GI Bill with an 18-month enlistment.
Was that an inducement for
Oh yes,
enlisting?
oh yes. That was a major inducement, because the GI Bill, as you will recall, was 4 years of college, or 36 months of college, at the place of your choice. And the government would pay the full tuition plus $65 a month, which at that time was enough to live on for a student. And so it was a great inducement. And practically everybody in our company had enlisted because of that reason. It was a fast way to college. They didn't have many scholarships out there at that time. And so that's why I say the Army of Occupation in this time was post-high school, postgraduates high school. And so many of those who signed over as civilians. You know, they'd been discharged and chose to be discharged in Tokyo, and then took a civilian job. And sometimes officers extended their tour and stayed on there. And so that was a mix. The permanent army, people that wanted to extend their tours usually brought their dependents over and set up a society of their own.
We didn't really cover much about your Korean. How long did that last?
Oh, I went into the Army as a second lieutenant, all of a sudden decreed a gentleman, a scholar, and all that by Congress. And, after my ROTC time at Missouri. And so I went to Fort Sill, and there I studied artillery, and as I say, was talented in only one area of artillery, and that was forward observing. That's the least desirable job in artillery. But I was pretty good at that. They said I could shoot. All right. And while I was there, Beverly came to visit me in Thanksgiving.
How did you meet you?
Oh, Beverly and I went to Missouri together. We were both I was very active in speech, debate, and theater, and so was she. And so the chemistry just mixed after about 2 years, and we started going together there.
And what family do you have? Or did you have?
Oh, I was an only child. My mother and my father lived in St. Louis. And
but what family did you and Bev have?
We had one son, Jerry, who is now in Des Moines. He's in an advertising agency, and is a huckster.
Grandchildren?
Three.
Three.
3 boys.
I suppose they're grown now.
No, one's 10, one's 7, and one's 5.
Oh.
And I must say, I admire my son, the logistics of transporting the 3 of them from Des Moines to Crawfordsville. He has a back seat of his van made up like a sumo wrestling ring. And it's almost a continuous battle from the time they leave till the time they get here. But that's my family. And,
are they coming to Wabash, those boys?
they all say they want to. And I said, well, you know, there are no girls there. And they say, we don't want girls. We don't like girls. So it's quite all right with them.
Joe, talk a little bit about the faculty of Wabash when you got here.
Oh my! Well, you talk about change. It was a time of giants at Wabash. Byron Trippett, who was president when I came here in
He had
60.
succeeded Sparks.
Frank Hugh Sparks, who was something of a legend already. But I came as an instructor, and in addition to teaching in the college and coaching debate, I was also teaching in the summer program with the executives. We had Sparks had set up an executive program that was would come back 3 summers and take the liberal arts. But at any rate, at the time, the faculty was Warren Shearer, Willis Johnson, Ed Hainish, George Lovell, Phil Wilder, good Lord, Pete Vaughn was still around, well, he was a football legend, and
Was Ted Gronert still?
Ted Gronert was still here. He wasn't teaching anymore, but Ted was still here. And he was mostly doing columns for the newspaper at that time.
He what?
Do columns.
Oh, yes.
Remember those?
In the journal.
Yeah, in the journal. Yeah. I like Ted because he had that kind of vigor and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Vic told me that Ted told him, once made a remark to him that he always envied. Ted said he'd never been bored. And he had that kind of mind, you know.
Yeah.
He was always curious and looking for something else. But he did a good deal for that college. Byron Trippett considered him as his mentor, and so on. But there was an awful lot of paternalism on that faculty. For instance, a young faculty member coming in would go to a faculty meeting, and here were all of these giants sitting around this round table in the Goodrich Room. If you've seen that, it's like a mausoleum with Pierre Goodrich's idea of what civilization should be engraved on the wall. But anyway, they met in that room. And there would be Trippett presiding. And on one side of the table would be Warren Shearer. The other side of the table would be Willis Johnson. And Ed Hainish would be down there. And they would debate vigorously in those meetings. Now, the thing was, that new faculty members were not allowed to vote for a year on any motion because they didn't know enough. And so we would sit there, we'd be allowed to speak to motions, but we wouldn't be allowed to debate, to vote on them, and so on. Well, they finally got rid of that, and now anybody that joins the faculty is a full member of the faculty right from the start. But there was that kind of paternalism where a small group of the...
Was Dean Kendall here?
No, he had retired, and Steve Kurtz. Steve Kurtz was dean. I don't know if you remember Steve.
Oh, yeah, I remember Steve.
And Ben Rogie. No, Ben Rogie was dean at that time. Ben Rogie. And Ben was a delight. And, of course, he had a way with his humor of offsetting any conflict. And Trippett needed that. Norm Moore was dean of students, and he became a legend in his time. So that the campus was small, all male, and robust. And that was the feeling of the place. We felt it was still pretty vigorous in the demands on students, that if you didn't want to work, you didn't get through here. But at the same time, there were still some of them that were the gentleman C's. And they worked.
Inslee Osborne was gone, wasn't he?
Yes, Inslee was gone. And Ferdy was chair of the English department. Walt Ferdy. Yeah. I'd like to tell you something about when I was hired. Vic called me and said, why don't you come to Crawfordsville and meet some of the people? So Bev and I got in the car and we dropped our son off at his grandmother's in St. Louis. Drove on to Crawfordsville, and as we approached, we were coming up by Turkey Run. And you know, some of the front porches down there are distinctive. I mean, stuffed sofas on the porch, washing machines, and sometimes old commodes in the backyard with a flower pot. She said, you've got to be kidding. You got to be kidding. So we drove into town, and she looked at it. It wasn't getting much better. We were coming in from that route on 47. I said, well, now, wait a minute. You know, it was a dark, dreary March day. So we drove into the campus, and she said, well, this is better. And so at that time, wives were put aside. And she was taken to dinner by Marion Powell. Yeah. And I was taken to dinner by members of the faculty. And I'll never forget, Butch Shearer was there, and Walt Ferdy, and George Lovell, and Vic, and Rogie. And so I was feeling pretty important at that time, I guess, but I started mouthing off about some of the problems in Columbia, Missouri, where they were having a great debate about a tax problem. Well, Scheer comes plowing in. What do you mean you're having a debate about a tax problem? What perfectly legitimate argument that they have for it. And I said, well, I don't agree with you. And he said, what do you mean you don't agree with me? Anybody with any economic sense at all would agree with that. And I said, well, maybe, but I just don't agree with it. And he says, well, tell me about debate. And I said, well, I don't believe in debating both sides of the issue in public. I think we do it in practice, but not in public, because I think there's a problem of ethos involved. What do you mean you don't do it in public? Well, God, that's what debate is, you know. And I said, I went home to bed that evening at the motel and said, how did it go? I said, well, most of them were fine. There was this one little SOB. I swear I'm never going to get a job here. Well, I got back and Vic calls about 2 days later and he says, well, we want to offer you the job. I said, you got to be kidding. How about Scheer? And he said, oh no, he was your strongest supporter. He liked it. He said he wanted somebody to disagree with him. So,
where did they put you up when you first got here?
out here at the motel, the Riviera. Oh, that was an eventful evening because you heard doors slamming and opening and closing every night. I mean, all night long.
Where'd you first live when you came here?
Well, our first house was out across from the Lutheran Church on Wabash. A little yellow house, and it was only about 4 rooms. And we rented from the Ramseys. I don't know if you remember them or not. He ran a implement store.
Oh, yeah.
Tractor implements.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we stayed there for about 2 months, and then a big house opened up on Jennison that we could rent. We went over there, and that was right behind the hospital and so on. And then after that, a house opened up on campus, and we moved into the gray house back of the Tau Kappa Epsilon house.
That's Mrs. Bodine's house?
I guess it was. But it had been moved over from the campus.
That was Mrs. Bodine's house.
Yes, it was a lovely place, paneled in cherry and oak, and nice living room.
It's still there.
It's still there and in good repair. So that's where we lived. And then finally, we ended up on Rock River Ridge Road. We bought the house from Harold McDonald, who was a college artist, and have been there for almost, well, since 1967.
That was the old Ferris place, wasn't it? What was the
Next door to Old Ferris.
Oh, next.
This was the accountant, Allen's house.
Perk Allen.
Perk Allen.
Yeah.
He started it out as a basement summer place out on the creek, and then he added a one-room cabin, and that's the major part of the house still, but it was 40 feet by 20 feet. Then he added on rooms as he went on, and so it grew just like Topsy.
Well, Joe, I think we're going to quit.
Well,
We've got a lot of good local history here.
well, I'm glad to talk to you, and I think your project is a wonderful thing.
Well,
So years from now, people will look at this and say,
people look at that and they're going to say, well, this is what Crawfordsville was like.
my God, you don't suppose they will hold it against us?
Well,
Okay.
I'll shake your hand and we'll
Thank you.
appreciate you coming.